All right, as I told you, this is an interchange. This is an exchange. Um, we're inviting everybody to ask any questions they want of our panelists. In exchange, each table, there's a sheet on each of the tables. Should be two sheets on the table. In exchange for asking your question, we'd like you to answer one of these three. So when you want to speak, please raise your hand. We have mobile mics to come to you. We'd like you to stand, introduce yourself, and choose one of the three questions briefly. Has today's discussion provided you with new information? Has it changed your thinking? Has it changed your thinking on the need to start investing and or competing in using these technologies? Second, for guests who have adopted AI and automated technology, what have your particular challenges been? Was it difficult? The capital investment, did you add or lose net employees? That's important for us to know. And for businesses that have not adopted yet, what's keeping you on the sidelines? Are there particular challenges, particular issues that are either preventing you or stopping you right now from investing and getting into this field? I'll add a fourth as a bonus, as we are here to talk about policy. What is it and we have our leader of economic development, what kind of things can the public sector, the universities, institutions, what kind of policy can we be developing locally to start sponsoring and spurring and assisting your investment, research, and development of these technologies, again, in the interest of helping each of you to compete in this market? Because if we don't, then there are plenty of other regions that are already racing to fund, invest, and support their local businesses adopting robotic, AI, and advancing in these fields. My personal opinion, again, as I said this morning, we can't afford to lose that race. So if you've got policy suggestions, that would be question number 4. So you can ask your question. Please answer one of ours, one of the 4, one of the 3. And I think with that, we'll get started. The mobile mics will come to you. Would anybody like to start off? First, I'd like to ask a couple of introductory questions. Can we just do show of hands? Businesses, representatives of businesses that are in architecture, please raise a hand. Representative businesses that are in engineering, please raise a hand. Representative of businesses that are in construction or engineering and construction. And this is the this is the $18 billion question. Businesses that are either actively researching and developing or actually already engaged in using AI or automated technology or robotics regularly in your business. Any adopters in the room? There we are. I think typical of what our research has been of the region, encouraging adoption, so trying to raise that rate. All right, let's start. If you have a question, raise your hand. Our microphone will come to you. Anybody like to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Spence. I'm representing Turner Construction. I'm a project engineer up at the Fort Lauderdale Airport. My question is, with wanting to engage more small businesses and CBEs and MBEs, how do you think this is going to affect them? You know, the initiative is 20%, right? 20% construction force on jobs, 25% construction force on jobs to to be CBEs or small businesses. What are your suggestions, or how do you feel like this is going to affect them?
I'll take a shot at that. I don't know if, so first of all, we are actively involved with an initiative in partnership with Broward County and a number of different organizations there. And it's being led by the Health Foundation here. And I won't go through all the details of why the Health Foundation. But it's an initiative that's designed to help small and disadvantaged businesses gain more access to contracting, particularly from anchor institutions that we have, like governmental entities, hospitals, universities. And so I'd be happy to share with you a little bit more detail about that and where the initiative is at. But virtually every major medical institution, the big governmental entities, the county governments, most of the larger cities within the 2 counties, and then the hospitals within both counties are all actively participating and really looking for creative ways that they can bring more business to disadvantaged companies. The primary focus is not on moving business around within the community. It's trying to identify things that are being bought elsewhere, outside of this region, outside of this state, that could be sourced within the state and sourced by companies like yours and others. So the idea is one that should benefit businesses like yours in the long run, as well as other established companies as well, who are better positioned to provide a good or a service. The other thing that I would suggest is that this is a great opportunity, especially given some of the technologies that are being discussed. It's really a heads up that you should take back to your team and say, we need to plan for these new concepts that are coming. If you're not in the robotic manufacturing or fabrication business, it's certainly something you ought to be looking to do. And those resources are right here. Here's FIU, and they're actively involved with it. If you're not into additive manufacturing, again, that technology is out there, and there's a lot of places to get that. And I know, again, you have it here at FIU. And so I think there's opportunities to get involved. And then there are resources that are available from a training standpoint and other things that can come from the governmental entities, sources like CareerSource and others that can help. So I offer that. I'm happy to spend some more time with you outside of this with the particulars around the Anchor initiative, where we're trying to bring more business, as well as about some of the talent initiatives.
Turner's a global construction company. Is Turner actively involved in either implementing, researching, developing robotic technology, automated construction of any way?
We are focused on innovation. Thank you. I think we're focused this year on prefabrication mostly, and how we can increase that ability to do that for our clients. That's where we're focused. I think our technologies in terms of how we share information, how we document control, things like that, those are the obvious places that we have been involved, but robotically, not extremely, but more just prefabrication.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can we get a microphone up here?
Yeah, sure. Albert Gomez, Industrial Components. I noticed I wanted to lean it towards all of you were focused on the design component. I felt like you were developing a lexicon on how to replicate and teach, and then drive maybe an ecosystem or a systems approach to applying robotics. But I saw one miss, and I'm wondering, I'm sure all of you are thinking of it or have it as a foundation. Everything was about the client and facilitating the client's needs or your own ecosystem within your own processes. And I see constantly at a municipal level or at a regional level in policy that they miss the people-centric needs in the design. And I'm wondering, with regards to robotics and new design methodologies and building out these lexicons, how we can solve some of these intersectional issues around equity, around building usable cities, livability, general resilience, as a functional, whether it be through automation, AI, what have you. How do we draw that up so that buildings aren't only about the envelope, they go beyond the envelope to really embrace the city and become an engine?
I think it's a really good question, because which we need to make a lot of discussion. Actually, we just discussed it last week, have a special event in UVA. We're talking about the same question. How to address the technology in the social networks in the future. I think right now is a special time. It's not, technology is not just like a post-rational process to help people just solving the problems. For example, clients have some requirements. I like the super big house, for example. It's like everything should be big. Everything should be like very traditional style or some this kind of thing. So this is a time I think we need to rediscuss the technology in the design scenarios and in the design process. I think which is about the beauty of the building is not just the one motivation. I think it's just part of the motivation because we need to address all the aesthetics in a bigger global vision because everything you need to put in a big vision to think about why you construct it, how you construct it. And if your construction takes special risks with all the human beings. So right now we're talking about the post-human. That I think that is extremely challenged to critically talk about the industry, how we make innovation for the industry. I think the design motivation right now is for the high efficiency, and the high efficiency means we need to save material to build, to deploy this kind of technology to keep the speed, rapid speed of growing, of the global growing, which is every year growing, everywhere, right? It's growing, cannot stop. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for economics. And this kind of growing should base on a more efficient, I think, bigger vision to think about not the individual requirements, not a requirement just from the client. We need to educate the client. For example, we have a lot of clients. We have state client, we have private client. But I think it's good sometimes if you set up your reputation by some practice, and a lot of new clients were looking for you for the similar vision because they want to like doing the similar things. For example, I designed in bamboo community center for a very poor local countryside, which is like 1 hour and a half away from the big city. And the phenomenon is the hollow effects because all the young generation moving out. They don't like to stay in their hometown. So I think I designed 6 buildings in a 86 family small village. I think in 2 or 3 years, things changing because a lot of visitors visit their village because of new buildings, because of new infrastructures. I think all this kind of new beauty it's like based on a systematic renovation, or it's kind of all the buildings are timber structure, robotic made. But if you do not talk about that, no one can notice it is a robotic made, but they just notice the special beauty, double curvature, or this kind of very contemporary feeling of the space coming out, which is not like the traditional ways to construct a building. It's just people like some new things, right? I think this kind of new technology can bring a lot of new aesthetics to the young generation especially, and they will be proud to organize special event, like invite their friends coming to make parties, something like that, and including some summer camp will be held in their small village. So things are happening, are changing. So I think it's the building, the design of building or the building industry is not only a practical or it's a business. I think I'm more would like to put it as an education process because every project have their own special vision. If it can influence more, not just a single project, that would be more meaningful, I think.
Actually, I want to follow on to that. Philip, it's interesting. I mean, China's built its global lead in manufacturing based on a vast army of lower wage labor, and over time, China has now become extremely sophisticated in the technologies that it deploys. You're at the real cutting edge of deploying robotics, automation in the construction and design industry. Is there thinking and policy in China saying, you know, we've traditionally built, has been very labor-centric in how we've built all of our cities, we've built all of our housing. Is there thinking and or policy in China about, well, we know we're pushing the envelope, you're pushing the envelope on these technologies, is they're thinking about protecting China's labor or advancing or bringing its labor into this next generation?
I think it's a hot question. We make discussion every year, year by year, in the past 10 years. A lot of discussion on that, but I think the situation, the phenomenon in China right now is the labor cost increasing every year. I think economic growing like 6%, but the labor cost increasing like 8 to 9% in the past 10 years. You can imagine, for example, in Shanghai, the labor cost in the like high-rise building last year is 33%. 33%. But in Japan, they already experienced this process. More than, I think the edge is 35%. More than 35% machine will replace the human labor. I think that's right now already we're facing with a lot of phenomena. If you go to a construction site, you see the laborers, they're older than 40 years old, will be like 70%. Fewer young generation would like to go to doing some construction work. Maybe after their graduation from university, would like to do some work in the factory. Maybe this generation play with iPad every day, play games. Maybe they can show some robotics will be their interest, not go to the high-rise, this kind of construction site to looking for this kind of job. So that is a phenomenon really happening year by year. And some big construction group, we're working with some like China construction group, which is very large. And they every year, they just worry about the labor cost because that is growing, every year growing, which is faster than the economic growing. So they invest a lot, actually, in the past 10 years to update the version of the industry. And we make huge discussion not only in the university, in the academic work, but also in the practical, in the business part, and not just this big company, including some small business. The small business, you want to make more like innovation based on some specialty. Without the specialty, maybe you're a chair designer, you need to fabricate your chair by your team. So maybe 3D printing is a way how to print a chair, or maybe the robotic wood structure can make the joints more efficiently. That is some updated version of the industry, which is really, we're experiencing that right now. And the culture in China right now, I think, is quite supposing this kind of innovation, including the investor, including the state investment. I think the atmosphere is like a lot of pushing to I think it's similar here. Why have this kind of very special meeting, grant summit, is because of, I think, everyone would like to make update innovation. I think it's same situation globally.
That's interesting. So in China, China's already contemplating that rather than just assuming these technologies will displace small businesses, this could actually be a tool to help small businesses and actually grow their share and compete. I mean, some of the thinking we need to adopt here. Anybody out there, any other questions? And I'd like to throw out, anybody, is their business thinking about this? Are you on the cusp? If you're not, give us your comments on, do you see this as a competitive necessity? Are we being alarmist by saying that this is how the world is going to build and soon? Do you not see it that way? Is this something you think is 10 years in the future? Is it immediate? Is it far flung? What's kind of consensus in the room? Some of you looking at this, and
I'll jump in there. Sorry. So, hey everybody, work for DPR Construction. So we have 4 corporate strategies, and one of them is prefab and manufacturing. So we are investing heavily into prefab and manufacturing. It is not something we're seeing a tidal wave of robotics hitting our job sites. We're not really afraid of that right now, because the reality is construction is a very complex thing, and to make a construction deal work, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to schedule, cost, and productivity, and those things will always weigh right now. And then, of course, your local labor market, which is different in Miami versus a labor market in New York with unions versus a labor market in Los Angeles. So building a building is a very complex thing. So, prefab, I want to push it back to you guys and ask, what's a better way for us to partner? Because we have 20 active job sites around Miami right now, and there's people working right now and building buildings right now. How can we partner with you guys so you're not working in a vacuum and you're working on solutions that are merging towards a point where we could all meet down the line saying, hey, this is something that we'll accept as a product and that we would be excited about buying because, Florida spends $10 billion a year on construction. So there's a lot of money out there for construction. So I just want to know, what's a better way for us to partner? Is it you come to our job sites? Is there a facility where you have tools where we could give you feedback and come up with an idea and keep on investing in it? I think that's the best way for us to solve this problem together.
Well, I'll jump in on that. I mean, by the time the time you guys have broken ground, too late, right? It's too late to have the discussion because the job's already been designed, it's already been permitted. The conversation about the integration of any kind of construction or fabrication strategy, whether it involves robotics or not, if it's going to inform the front end of the process, you guys got to be at the table at the beginning of the process or very near to the beginning of the process. Because these guys from Perkins and Will can get super expert on robotics, but if they can't transfer those ideas into construction ideas at full scale, which they can't do without your help, they're just experimenting. They're doing science experiments for their own benefit, which at this stage of the game, because this technology is so nascent, is really actually quite useful. But in order for this thing to scale, there's going to have to be a refactoring of the relationship between people who build things and people who design things. Otherwise, we just won't make any progress.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I would say even way before the job is even conceived by the client, we have to be experimenting with DPR and with Turner and with everybody else. So the proposal we had actually to your is it Tucson or Phoenix plant that does metal stud prefab was that we'd like to know what's going on in that shop, and that's fine. You guys aren't being secretive about it, but also we'd like to kind of have dialogue that says, how could we, as architects, inform your process, and is the process you're using flexible enough to accommodate it? And then, or is it that shop all about cranking out, flat partition walls? And if so, maybe it's not the right forum for the dialogue. But we want to understand how. Yeah, well, I guess my point is having this dialogue, even here today, like it's about forming an agreement that we're working on the problem together and we're trying to solve it together. And when a client comes along for whom robotics would be a great solution, or a design comes along with Perkins & Will as the architect and DPR as the contractor, we say, we're going to approach the design from a robotic standpoint. Are you with us? It's that kind of thing. But yeah, that has to happen way before.
Yeah, so I'm going back a little bit. So other industries are actually doing conceptually what I think is being described here and have been for some years. Automotive aerospace, as an example, the last major airplane project or program that the company worked on when I was there was the Boeing 777. So that's going back a few years when that aircraft was being designed. But historically, the Boeing company had designed an aircraft, and then they would send component manufacturers like us an envelope that we had to design inside of with all the performance criteria. And so we would design to that, and invariably there would be issues that required re-engineering and rework and so on. On the 777, we basically tied right into their design system, and we designed while the aircraft was being designed. And our product was seamless. It worked as smooth as could be. And essentially, it allowed us to use new technology. It allowed them to implement new technology. I've seen the exact same thing happen in automotive, where major tier ones now are designing in conjunction with the auto companies as they redesign the various autonomous and artificial intelligence-based vehicles and other things that's happening. They're not doing it in a vacuum, and I think it's incumbent upon you to also invite into your very early processes those kind of new technologies so that you can design together, because I think it's going to ultimately make a difference.
Yeah, I'll say one thing, and just to be really forthright, the 777 is a great example because, as far as I know, everybody used the same model. There wasn't a Navisworks model and a Revim. I'm in the parlance of architecture. There wasn't a whole bunch of different models. If you were a fabricator, if you were a whoever superintendent, if you were the guy out on the floor building a thing, it was all the same model. And I think AEC should go that direction. I don't know how to get there, but I think we need to talk about it.
But in this case, the models are a proxy for the psychodynamics of the supply chain. The 777 example, which is often used to bludgeon the AEC industry, frankly, no, it's okay. It's instructive up to a point. But the thing about Boeing is they control the entire supply chain end to end. So the use of a consolidated set of CATIA models, it's completely vertically integrated, because if you want to play with Boeing, you have to use their tools and use their models. But that does not happen in our industry. So you guys, DPR and Perkins and Will, can be friends and play softball and visit each other's offices. But until there's something else that creates a connection there that is operating at a policy level in terms of city county procurement, happens in terms of risk management models, because he can have a lot of conversations with you about how to build stuff, but his contracts say, I'm not responsible for the means and methods of construction, right? And his insurance company is like freaking out because he's visiting your fabrication shop. These things have to change. If those things don't change, I mean, then this model thing becomes uninteresting. I mean, everybody can use whatever models they want. It doesn't matter anymore.
So I would just say, one thing that I think is interesting is, and it's been brought up a couple of times, and I think you even insinuated it in your question, that there is this enormous disparity still between the drawn building and how it's intended to be constructed and what happens in a foundation in the mud with material on site. There's an enormous amount that's not documented, that's just understood. And I think that through the trades that are involved with the construction process, both builders and architects, the more that we at least attempt to own up to the reality that many of those things can actually be optimized. They can be re-engineered. They can be modified with the augmentation of new technologies, such as augmented reality and such as digital fabrication. So I think one of the things we're trying to do at Branch is to try to evaluate our processes and evaluate with our clients their own construction expectations and say, how are your consultants being engaged in the process, and how can we measure things that they're expecting to happen in a certain way, and then design the process from the front end to be modified for proficiency or for optimization. And I think that's part of what's bringing people to the table around a common sense of change. Now, there isn't necessarily, in this particular case, a singular platform that everyone's using, but there's a common sense of things aren't as, things don't work as well as they could, and projects aren't coordinated as well as they could be. There is opportunity for change, and I think in many cases, builders don't fully see the potential of automation relative to fabrication. They don't fully see the potential relative to augmented reality and what it can do for people that are actually working on the job site and enabling them to see the work that they're doing through a different lens and the value of that. So I think coming together and really, in a sense, quantifying that value so that it can motivate us to bridge those gaps is a big part of the process.
I'd like to ask my colleagues here, I mean, we all teach here, so I'd like to ask you guys a question, particularly those of you who've taught architects, not to throw water on the techno enthusiasm in the room here, but where I teach, our students have been doing digital fabrication for 20 years. We have CNC mills. I'm about to sell our KUKA robot because nobody's doing anything interesting with it. We've had it for 20 years. Looks freaking cool when the kids come to look at our school, right? Here's our KUKA robot. Of course, it's covered in dust because nobody's used it. in I don't know how long. And I guess my question is, this idea of the relationship between design and digital fabrication has been on the table for 20 years in design education. So there's a generation of young and middle-aged architects out there who know how to do all this stuff. The thinking being they would go out and revolutionize the world. Now we're having the same conversation about robotic construction. What's going to be different? What's going to be different?
So I'll jump in there. I think the difference is the business case, and it's all about money, to be honest. All right, so we're running out of labor and talent. So if we could figure out robotics in construction, trust me, we'll do it. Just right now, there's not a lot of capital investment to solve these problems. So I think we just need to, like, when we talk about a building, you see buildings every time you drive every day. I'm working with Perkins and Will right now in the Health building in Solmia. It's going to be a beautiful hospital. There's bite-sized, every building can be broken down into its components. You know, nothing's complex once you break it apart and look at it line item by line item. So we're not saying we're going to manufacture the whole building, because I don't think that will ever happen. Like pouring a concrete shell 500 feet in the air, but if we're talking about interior construction, partitions, bathrooms, kitchens, repeatable things, absolutely. Window systems, different components of the building. That's where we need to work together and partner. Just like you said, sir, Mike, where you have a design criteria to a certain point, like the envelope of an airplane, same thing like the envelope of a building. Let's find pieces of a building that we can manufacture, perfect those, understand them, and then conquer more scope. You know what I mean? So we see opportunities right now at DPR with interior partitions, interior panels. Like we have a wall that's 100 feet long. We rather manufacture that wall in 8-foot sections, bring it on a truck, and stand the wall up in 8-foot sections with everything in there. And we're working on that in the DBC factory in Phoenix. I would love for you to come see that. And those are the ways we're going to continue to work towards it. So I don't think there's the design language, the contracts, the lawyers, and the city, it's always going to be here. The legal nature of the deal is always going to be here, and we're okay with that. If we could just find a way to break it into bite-sized components and monetize it, I think we'll be fine. Designers need to focus on design and making the building pretty and making it functional. No offense. And we will figure out a way to build it. And I don't think an architect cares if we manufacture a wall or build it in place. So I think it's pretty simple. It's just we need to understand what the scopes that we're going to focus on are. Does that make sense?
Well, it can't be that simple, or many more of us would be neck deep in it.
Yeah.
Is it simple up front as a knowledge question? Just knowing who's out there, what they deliver, how they need to integrate into your construction process, at what point, and what kind of pricing? Does it begin with that? Because we're contemplating an important part of the whole platform is an information exchange and just knowledge of who's doing what out there as a starting point. Does that have value to all of you out there?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it's a prerogative question in the statement. I just wanted to open up the minds and think. I think we're doing it right now, and we just need to continue this and continue to have the conversations and continue to test ideas together. And, we need to open up our job sites and let you guys see it a little bit more firsthand, and we need to understand your design process a little bit more. But I see it getting there and trending there. But to answer your question, yes, we're thinking about prefab heavily. It's the number one priority for DPR construction right now. And the second priority is data analytics. It's the second one.
An interesting follow-on, and we're seeing a lot of people looking into really who is innovating. And the question of whether it's going to be existing companies that get into this or whether it's going to be a whole new wave of innovators coming from all kinds of different places. Is KUKA Robotics still here? We had representatives from KUKA Robotics. No? RSVP? No? they leave? Oh, still here? All right, I'll go back to them. Tell us more about what it would take. You know, what are challenges, what are obstacles to all of you getting involved in this as you begin to research it or want to start to apply it? Any other, we have another question.
So one quick thought,
Go
just in response to the question earlier, and I think it's a great question, it's an important question, and I think there are probably many, many different answers, but one that immediately came to mind is the idea that for a relatively long period of time, from my perspective, there's been a lot of seduction relative to what automation and digital fabrication and new technology literally looks like. I think for me, I watched Columbia in the 1990s under Bernard Tschumi produce an enormous body of work that the world was seduced by the way it looked, not what it was doing relative to the performance of buildings. And I think there is still a lingering residue from that, where much of the world is still at awe of what it looks like to have new technology integrated into the way that we inhabit the built environment. And it's interesting that the way that you talked about the robots at Yale, maybe what it takes is for us to literally get bored with what automation and digital fabrication and VR looks like and be seduced by the Kieran Timberlake project, which was the most compelling project. Just as a reminder of what that was, literally being seduced not by what anything looks like, but by the capability of these technologies to transform the way a building works and returns an experience that is valuable.
No, I completely agree. I mean, that the kind of make cool, use the technology to make cool, shapy things. We're completely over that. We have 60 3D printers in our building and 14 laser cutters, and they're like printers. Nobody cares anymore. Yeah. It's just not that interesting anymore. Now, the question I have is, now what?
Good afternoon. I'm Jose Matute with Guri Matute, architects. My question is mostly for Mr. Yuan. I was particularly impressed by your designs, the way they're built, and but mostly the amount of time that it took to build such complex structures and unconventional. I wonder. I want to know more about the business model, or the way we're used to the design, bid, build, or design, build method, or the way the whole arrangement comes together and projects get delayed because of those models that we are used to here, particularly in the United States. See, those projects are built in China. Can you tell us more about how you get those buildings built in such a short period of time for such a beautiful structure and unconventional and innovative? And what does it take? Is the designer the builder? Is all one seamless process? How do you do that?
Thank you. Thanks for your question. I think maybe goes back a little bit and then go to your question. I think it's extremely critical to how to rethinking our age. Actually, what's right now happening is quite different to the end of 90s. You're talking about the culture in Colombia, what Bernard Tschumi setting up, like a digital era, because everything in that time is focused on, I think, avant-garde is focused on just the formalism. The new form, new methodology can make you very cool. It's like something very advanced and can leading you to very speciality, right? But I think after this 21st century, something happened, changed. I think the technology may be also about the digital, which is we sometimes name post-digital for post-humanism. I think technology just emerged into the whole process because everyone use computer, and all the process we have a lot plugged in right now. For example, I teach this semester in UVA. I counted we have like 12 different plug-in in the whole process. But actually, when you make use of them, you not firstly define the plugin as a primary design things, because we have some other most important things, which should be like, for example, the performance-based, which is kind of new beauty coming out, and the ethics of the social networks to reorganize the architecture with the environment, with the human behavior. That makes the building just make a huge paradigm shift. I think the phenomenon of this change maybe goes to the form will be like this kind of derivation, gradient changes. Maybe if you want to make a building very good for the shading system, for example, maybe the shading is changing with different parameters, which is not the same window as the modernism building. So that kind of things must follow by some new fabrication tools to make this kind of form. So but form is not the first thing. First thing is about you need to find a new relationship between the human being and the environment. I think that the design culture is changed because we put the architecture and human being, not the higher hierarchy on the planet. We're thinking about some most important thing on the planet. When you make a design, you need to find a better relationship between the designer, user, and the planet. So that is something I think is fundamentally from the educator. I think how we training my student actually, this is a vision, totally change the paradigm. And formalism only becomes part of it, very small part of it. And this small part may be just a phenomenon of the result of the new thinking methodology. I think in this kind of process, we have different, like to the social practice, we have different kind of leadership, actually. I want to, the guy may be living, but he put forward a very critical question about the practice or the business, right? I'm talking about the different kind of social process, including the States or China or Europe. We all have different kind of avant-garde or different like leadership. I think in China, I give you some very good example. We have two kinds of business model. One is, I think, is totally top-down. It's some very big construction group. They play a very important leadership for the industry innovation. They have their duty. They earn a lot of money, but they invest a lot in R&D. So I think what they're doing is super important to change the policy, change the regulation, change the working flow. I think that's one kind of leadership. The second is about super small business, actually how to make yourself special. That is more from an artistic perspective. It's not just from the low price, because the big business can make super low price, but the small business sometimes based on the speciality. I think that's very important. If you want to start some business, the speciality can create different kind of business model. I think that is how we educate right now in the university, because we need some infrastructure system for the small business to integrate the small to the big. I think some infrastructure, like FU Robot, what we develop is this kind of sharing culture, because the small, for example, my student, if they want to develop some platform, they have no skills to develop robotics, right? But we freely give them, you can use this to develop your own tools. I think they need some help. They need some infrastructure, social infrastructure system to help them. I think maybe the grant, submit grant, the education submit grant, if you can set up some infrastructure system to help the small business or to help this kind of people, they need technology. I think this kind of things is like the infrastructure is not just for the road, for the bridge, these kind of things, but the infrastructure for the future internet, big data culture. We need to support different people in a more like eco platform. So that is things what I'm thinking and doing. The business model, you're asking how we organize our business. I think it's quite interesting, because I think one more thing I want to add is the future is a design thinking based future. That is super important. Without design thinking, you're just make a business followed by your tradition skill. You cannot critically go beyond the others. I mean, the design thinking should base on first, it's a kind of integration thinking. This, I'm talking in my lecture today, my talk today, which is critically integration from designer and fabricator. I think if you define, I'm a designer, you are a fabricator, you are very traditional. I think the future is kind of integration because the designer could be a fabricator because if I have one robotics, I can make the chair. Every day in my office, we use plastic printed chair, 3 hours, one chair. If you can design a super cool form, then you can print it. You can sell it. That's a business, right? That's a new business. I think the new future building system can categorize in a lot of different, like table, we have a lot of like the lighting system, everything could be like subdivided in different kind of small business. And it's very competing. If someone interested in some creative process, you can design it and make it special. Maybe the cost of it, if you implement this kind of robotics, the cost could be increased. Just you buy the robotics costs a lot of money, and make use of them will like save a lot of money, because like KUKA can use 10 years, no problem, 20 years sometime. It could be like a very long-term make use this platform. So I mean, that is a revolution we should think about. How to think about the integration, how to think about the design thinking can give more opportunity to the small business first. Second, I think it's very important how I persuade my client from very beginning. I think, for example, the In Bamboo project, we use robotic to custom this kind of timber, will cost more money. But if you calculate the whole working flow, from the architecture design to interior design, interior fabrication, this is a whole process. Our building actually, we name it as a digital tectonics, with kind of a real representation from the structure system. We don't have this kind of ceiling. We don't have need to painting because timber itself is kind of quality of material. Actually, after the construction, we just make a pavement on the ground. That's the only decoration thing. And the cost of whole process, actually, for the timber construction, we earn money. That is like 20, 30% more expensive than the traditional construction. But we save money in the decoration. That is based on design thinking, and we persuade the client. I think as an integration process, you need to think in a different way, different model. Not, I think it's kind of, we should firstly find a building contractor, and then we find an interior contractor, and then putting them together. That's, I think, a traditional business model. But it depends on who organizes the whole thing. In China, we name it as EPC right now. The government make a lot of promotion for that. That's from the very beginning to the end, from designer to the fabricator, they should be like the one system. So it's kind of systematic organization for the whole thing, for how you can save time, save money. So why the big project very expensive? Because one big project have like 50, 60 consultants. When you try to dialogue, transfer the files to them and looking for the feedback from them and integrate them together will cost a lot of time and money. But I think the future, what I'm framing right now, if you can just in a super efficient platform to integrate this information in a very simple way, sometimes it's in-house, if you can directly translate your component to the fabrication machine without human being in the middle, just from the designer, from your model, directly to the machine, will save time, save money, a lot. I make some comparison on that. For example, we make the ceiling system, right? You have MEP engineer, you have some fire pipe, everything on that. If you can, your model is precise enough, you can directly send this model to some very special fabricator. They use some machine like cutting, like milling, like they're doing something machinic process to just follow your model. So the model is the most important thing. The digital model is the most important thing. And here we are not talking about digital is more important. It becomes part of the working flow. It's dominant the whole process. I mean, that is a revolution, how you can train in your team very strong. They can very precisely give these files to the fabricator. That is the key point. I think it's not very easily, but it's a new business model based on the skill of new organization of design from the designers. So it's still a design-oriented and design thinking based process.
Thank
It's
you.
just maybe.
In the following on the theme of making connections through the process and between different pieces of the whole design to occupancy continuum, I'd like to ask a question of our KUKA Robotics representative who is here today. If you could give a sense to our local businesses that are here, do you see any trends in who your customers are? Are they old line companies looking to innovate? Are they startups at the other side? Is there a predominant pattern in who and what is purchasing your products, then how they're using them, and where does Florida and South Florida compare geographically to the rest of the country? A lot of sales into, without devolving too much of your business, but how does South Florida compare?
So obviously robotics is known for automotive, right? Everybody knows that that's where robots are mainly used. If you go to the Greenville, South Carolina area, I think KUKA has probably about 4,000 robots just in that area between BMW and all their suppliers. What I've noticed about Florida is there's a lot of disruptive industries coming up. I've had people from this part of the state asking me about using a robot to paint cabinets. A lot of milling applications down here. I think one of our integrators has probably done a half a dozen milling integration for like parade floats. I think that's a big industry down here. But I actually visited a customer. Well, I'm hoping it's going to be a customer, and it's a disruptive industry that really is exciting to me in the Orlando area. And it's construction, but it's construction in a pod where they are constructing a bathroom in a pod, and they will be shipping that pod to Hilton's or Marriott's or hospitals. And then that bathroom is 100% constructed on site in Orlando. And they'll put 5 or 6 of these pods in a semi-truck and ship it to the job site. And they are zero automated, and they want to start off with doing a, I'm not in the construction industry, so I'm losing my thought. I get not mudding the wall, but when you have drywall and you're putting like a base coat on it, then they want this robot to sand the wall, and then they want the robot to prime the wall. That is their first thought of where they want to start automating, and I'm like, it's done all day long on a car body. It could be done on drywall. The second thing is they wanted to be able to lift the shower pan. That's about 250 pounds, put it into place. All the tiles are cut by a CNC machine, and because his bathroom is pretty much exactly, because they're just precision-made bathrooms. There's no worrying about the walls being out of square or anything like that. They know that it takes 8 full tiles, and then 6 half tiles and 3 quarter tiles, and all those tiles are cut assembly. The robot could go over and pick up those tiles and place them. That is their vision, and I think it's very doable, and I'm very excited that I hope this project moves forward because it's 100% manual labor right now. So those are the type of disruptive industries. I mean, and if you see this happening, I could just start imagining other industries in the construction and architectural where I could see that happening too.
Do you see a lot of crossover from industries into construction? I mean, one of the competitive disadvantages we have in Florida is we don't have that large manufacturing base, not a lot of automotive. Michigan, of course, majorly has historically, but then a lot of the other states in the South that went out and spent a lot of money to attract, Volkswagen, BMW, these manufacturers, they've got all of that knowledge, all that expertise, all that experience kind of built in. Do you see it translating out of those places into architecture, engineering, construction in those states? Is that starting to happen there?
Yeah, I do see it happening. The automotive industry is kind of cyclical, so you'll see people who are leaving that industry, and then they'll be like, oh, well, this same idea we were doing in this car factory could sort of be used in this industry too. So that's where I'm seeing some of the movement happening. Like I said, down here in South Florida, there is no manufacturing. It really is different industries, and we're doing quite a bit of robots down here. So it's been interesting, and I like the outside the box thinking. Everybody builds a car with a robot. Let's do something different with a robot.
All right, thank you. All right, we had a question in the back, and then Gray.
All right, my name is Stefan Izad. I'm from Coup Studio. We came down from Toronto, Canada. And my question is going to be actually directed towards Dr. Bernstein. Basically, just a quick summary of what our studio does. We're an architectural visualization company, but over the last 2 years, we have actively been working with the University of Toronto to take that medium into the construction industry as well. And basically, my question to you is, where do you see BIM going at its current pace? Because currently, as the BIM models get more complicated, the workforce that has to use them and follow through with them, the workforce that are using the models and have to coordinate with it are falling behind in terms of knowledge, and that is where BIM managers have to step in to coordinate the information. So basically, one solution that we are coming up with University of Toronto is the use of real-time rendering technologies to direct the information between the different parties. And I'd just like to know your thoughts on the future of BIM. Has it exhausted its resources, or do you see it improving in the near future?
Well, I think there are probably two directions that the BIM initiative can go. And I don't know which way it's going to happen because it's going to depend on, I think it's actually frankly going to depend on the emergence of machine learning algorithms. I think either BIM will grow into the fundamental knowledge platform that can be the organizing force of design and construction, or, and that'll happen if the platform is augmented with some of the more sophisticated sorts of technologies that are beginning to emerge. But the other possibility is that it's simply going to be used as a representational platform. And in this case, right now, it's, most BIM tools are being used to do working drawings. We could throw in a few, high resolution renderings if you want. I mean, that project that when I was at Autodesk and we did our IPD project, our contractor used our Revit model to make high resolution 3D renderings that he plotted on large pieces of paper and hung up on the job site on black pieces of gator board so they look like plasma TVs. And they just said to the construction workforce, make it look like this. I mean, he was rendering unpainted sheetrock walls. Like, after you're done taping this wall, it should look like this. That's not, a high use of technology. But I think the question's ultimately going to boil down to, is there some combination of interest by the industry in using that very high resolution information that's augmented in some way? Because right now, it's just a fancy drafting platform.
Hi, Tim Wensing, CMC Construction, and also part of the Industry Advisory Board for the School of Construction here at FIU. On BIM, right? So Andres and I told you at the break, we just completed 700-foot high-rise downtown, spent 5 years of our life on it, did it all in BIM. Andres did a fantastic job, brought in the MEP subs, really got the collaboration on coordination, got a lot of value out of it for visualization, got the subcontractors engaging with it. But if you do a survey of the local marketplace of all of our subcontractors, which is the majority of how all the work gets done, it's going to be a limited quantity of people who are really BIM savvy, right? And there's this huge growth that needs to happen to engage them and to bring up their skill sets, right? And so even though architects have been doing it for years and all this sort of stuff, the contractors are still just sort of getting into it in a sense, right? But if you're building a high-rise building and all the 3D printing in the world is great and it looks nice and all that stuff, but we're still doing sticks and bricks, right, like the pyramids, right? So vertical transportation of men and material and trash coming out is archaic, right? There's millions of dollars of stand-around time, right? Because we're physically moving everything with a Rubbermaid bucket and so forth, right? So if there was a clearinghouse of all the robotic technology, innovative kind of elements, right, machinery and whatever it might be, that people could be communicated to in the marketplace, so they could say, well, wait a minute, I'm able to put that to move stuff or pick up stuff or carry stuff, right, as opposed to just physically building something. That might be an angle to get it integrated, right? But I agree with this fellow over here, right? It all comes down to the components of the building, right? If you're going to do the prefabricated bathroom, if you don't do it from the get-go of the design, it ain't going to happen, right? Once you started the job, you're not going to come up with a prefabricated bathroom. It's not going to fit. So, but the partitions and all these other kinds of things are all just individual components, right? Whether it's holding a piece of threaded rebar at the top of a high-rise, that's a tower crane's holding, one rebar to spin it in because you have to use threaded couplers because of the congestion of the high-rise buildings we're building. If that could be a robot hung on top of a piece of formwork, right? A core area formwork, climbing form system, well, now you'd free up that tower crane. And all of that's real money, right? So that's my opinion.
That's excellent. Is that kind of consensus in the room? Just show of hands that we're thinking that there's great value added to not only products and who's out there, but also processes. What's the latest? What's the greatest? That there's a gap. Is that true to all of you're all in the business? Is it hard for you to find out who's doing what and who's out there on the edge and how much money maybe it is saving? Is that a common issue among everybody out there? Yes, no? No?
Yeah, I'm in the 3D manufacturing industry, and I help robotics companies manufacture their robots. And frankly, how I've seen additive manufacturing be brought forward in industry is based on the inability to achieve innovation in the design construct of what you're building with traditional manufacturing processes. So for instance, with direct laser sintering of metal, when you're doing orthopedic implants in additive manufacturing, you can't mill certain geometries to facilitate a end of bone metastasis, or you can't structurally put organic angles in the surface texture of the metal in order to generate bone growth. But you can do it on a 3D printing machine. And that is the guiding principle on why that is emergent in that industry. So what I'm seeing faster adoption is robotics and replacement, simple robotics and replacement of simple processes. Why do I know that? I run a contract manufacturing firm in a low-cost country. That is iterative, is available to everybody, and everybody will take that path of least resistance based on the methodology that has been shared several times here, that everybody's racing to the bottom on the lowest cost on building these high-rises. So that still will not be shaken off, whereas that other methodology that I referenced first, which is, creating something that is not manufacturable any other way, is the easiest path for integration, and then having. That's why I felt like you guys were hitting the head on the nail on the head. Is that you are developing a lexicon, a methodology for people to then implement this repeatable structure. You're not going to high volume produce robotic fabrication anytime soon. You might integrate it in the Henry Ford manufacturing line, but you're not going to do it in that format unless you put out 500 3D printing machines and you're somehow replicating scale. So you have to look at that as you can't depart. That's why I asked for the bigger vision, because if you have that bigger vision, you might be able to extend the design elements beyond what's available with traditional methodologies. I mean, look at the Hadid building, and Shaheen, look at with regards to organic gray infrastructure against sea level rise and things that we're talking about. These are things that are not available right now with traditional methodologies in manufacturing that additive manufacturing might bring to bear. And I counter that point. Yeah, there are robotic testing, tension wire testers, and climbing methodologies. But that is like, have you been to Hialeah lately? Have you gone to downtown Miami and see the workforce? It's just not going to be adopted here. Not at least in the States, not for a long time, unless we have like some sort of regulatory axe come down and require it. So I just challenge you guys to maybe think about that as a way to break it in further, and I'll leave it at that.
But if we asked this assembled group how many people were really working in this modality, and none of the hands come up. And this is the second meeting of senior AEC leaders that I've been in. Same question, same limited number of hands. And we're just in extremely early days. I mean, it's, you know, around at Yale, we call this the tchotchkes and pavilion, you know, syndrome, which is all you can make is little tchotchkes on a 3D printer, and everybody's, you know, using robots to make pavilions. Some of these guys are getting close to something that might remotely resemble a building, but we are nowhere close to an actual building yet using these technologies. So it's very, very early days. You know, Nicholas Negroponte said that technology adoption happens in 3 modalities. And in the first one, you just copy the old way that you were doing things. And it's not very interesting, but it's kind of it's the first step you have to get through until you figure out what the possibilities of the technology are. Then you extend your old way of doing things to doing the old way better. And then you can finally see your way to doing things in a completely new way. And so we're in the tchotchkes and pavilions mode right now, in my opinion.
I think there is a word talking about if you use a hammer, you're always thinking how to use a hammer to punch on
Like a nail.
nail, right? I think to my experience, I use a word like the human-machine propulsion in the building industry. I think this revolution is not a one-day transformation, everything replaced by robotics. It's a machine and human collaborative process. I mean, the propulsion of machine, not just robotics, could be like all different kind of machine, which engage a lot, step by step, into the building industry. I think some experimental work could be totally replaced by machine in a very short time. But most of the big industries, I think the labor cost, the budget, these kind of things will challenge a lot the whole process. And the most important, like the case study building in LA, actually is very good in the architecture history. Very good comments, very experimental, which leading the trend of the world at that time. But if you visit LA right now, you see that the LA case study is only just like less than 100, right? Most of the buildings still is very fancy house there, right? I think it's kind of culture will give a final decision or if we engage into this revolution. But I think the social process, the meaning for all the participants to the social process is what's your contribution, not only to the business part, but also to the culture part. I think if any one of us in the building history or in the human history, you can give your contribution to the revolution. I think that's, to me, I'm thinking that way. So although we take a lot of risk, actually, in different kind of, for example, this kind of test this time, why is test the load on the real building? It's kind of adapt to the client. If it crash, it will be crash. It's my duty. But it's standing there because we believe in the simulation from the computer, right? 3 layers of brick, 45-meter span. And the government don't like to sign anything on the approval for this pavilion. But we're talking about we want to make a load test on the real building, half load and full load test, 50 tons, 400 people standing on this building. I think that's the test. Sometimes someone should do that, but maybe it's not, it's not logical.
Well, I mean, they did that for Frank Lloyd Wright on the Johnson Wax building. They didn't have structural simulation software back then, right? They did exactly the same thing. They put bags of concrete on top of those columns.
Yeah, right. So I think that is something, human-machine collaboration is a long process. Right now, I agree, it's just a very starting point right now, just starting, but still the experimental project will create experimental business.
We have time for 2 more quick questions, one here and then one there. Yes?
Okay, I just want to say I appreciate very much that Philip Wan is talking about the human-machine nature of the planet kind of continuum, and also that the other Philip is talking about the integration of the process all the way up and down from manufacturing to the actual outcome of the client. or the desires of the client. And I'm wondering, can we reach beyond the client to the real overarching task of sustainability and urbanism? Can that be a part of this discussion, particularly in Miami, as a sort of, has been said many times, ground zero for climate change? And I also appreciate Albert Gomez bringing the same kind of overarching vision up.
Well, I mean, the building industry in the United States is largely immune to the influences of policy or anything that organizes us in alignment. And it's the closest example that I can think of is in the UK, where about 10 years ago, when Cameron's government decided that the building industry was important to global competitiveness, expensive because their buildings were all costing 20% too much, and producing tons of carbon. So they organized a government-wide policy initiative to organize the government. And basically, there was a shocking document written called the Government Construction Strategy that explained to anyone who was going to build for the government in the UK, and 40% of construction in the UK is government-sponsored, what standards they were going to adhere to, what the sustainability standards were, and what the technology standards were. And all the ships lined up, and things began to change very, very rapidly. That is extremely challenging in the United States. There is no similar, there would be no, unless somebody woke up in Washington one day and decided to create the Department of Construction, and the 22,000 regulatory jurisdictions in the United States decided they were all going to follow one leader. The change is very slow and incremental.
It's also interesting to think about what did happen in the UK. I mean, they totally prefabbed their industry. That was one thing. I don't know that they roboticized it, but
they certainly BIMified it.
Yeah, and so they prefabbed it, and then they also switched over to mass timber heavily. Almost all their residential construction for the past 5 years has been CLT. They've built over 500 buildings out of mass timber in the last 5 or 6 years, but then their policy changed again, and now they're not allowed to use it or something like this. So it's very interesting how the policy makes a difference, and I do wonder if we have to look at things through an apocalyptic post-human lens to get there and understand the value that robotics might or might not bring to that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of the motivation was also sheer scale. England was looking at the need to build at a minimum 300,000 new housing units in just the next 5 years, and said, well, how are we going to get there? And that's why they embedded
LA needs to
mass
build
production standards.
500,000 this year.
There you go, even more. We had one more question in the back. Yes?
Building processes. We deal with the industry as it is today. That's the kind of building that we do on a regular basis. We also work in BIM, but we spend, as was mentioned, most of our time turning really effective 3D information into collapses in 2D of things that give us information, but that are, because of contracts and things of that nature. I think there's a lot of interesting things of this talk. One of them is the interest in how things are done. I think one of the weirdest things that we deal with right now is most of our complications deal with a few things. One is we don't really exactly know how it's going to be done. So what we do is we give parameters around how we think it could be done until we finally resolve it and it's built, similar to some of the graphs that were being showed in the first presentation. The other thing is that we work with a lot of consultancies, people that understand materials and processes today, and our own experience dealing with those materials and processes every day. However, one of the fascinating things about this talk is the additive manufacturing, that basically the whole industry, in a sense, and the way we make things, the how of the way we make things is being altered radically. by some of the things that were expressed today, and that we're seeing more and more. I mean, we're seeing these in facade conferences. There's the big intersection right now. Sorry, this isn't a question, this is more of a commentary. But the big intersection I'm seeing right now is really between kind of envelopes and structure are happening kind of first. This is where we got the pavilion, kind of concept, where you're really dealing with shells and we're dealing with structures, integration of those things. I think some of the other things is that we really need to start tackling is all the other complexities that we deal with in most of the buildings that we do, which is multi-story. We deal with very complex integrated systems. We're talking about all the MEP systems integrated into the structures, into the shell, everything of that nature. And then, of course, prefab. So, I mean, in general, there's just a huge amount of trends and interest in what's going on here. I think really it's about new manufacturing processes. I think it's fascinating how we're dealing with new ways of communicating information. I mean, honestly, we have done this for several years, where our geometries are too complex to analyze in two-dimensional shop drawings, and we literally have accepted, sharing of models between us and our subcontractors as a way of approving, what's going to get built. Because if we try to collapse that back down into 2D, it doesn't make any sense at all. And so we've done that with work here in FIU. We've done that with work in other buildings, and we're doing it all the time, actually. So informally, we're kind of approving things that are not necessarily perfectly described in 2D space, which is great in a way. So I just think that the most exciting part about this is really new materials and processes. And for us to keep on kind of like similar to the way we're doing with drawings, where we're saying we're making this great 3D model that we have to then reduce down to the lowest common denominator of 2D drawings, we have a similar problem in manufacturing and building the projects, where we say, okay, well, these are the limits of the way we build drywall partitions today. But really what they're talking about is, do we need to continue to build drywall partitions this way anymore? I mean, we really got to reimagine the process from beginning to end. And the how is really the most important part of that, because it's not, we know how to make forms. We know that there's a million ways to build them, but the real intelligence comes in, what's the most efficient for materials? What's the lightest weight? What's the strongest? What's the fastest? All of these things are really what we have to bridge now. And I think in terms of new industries, if South Florida can be part of that, that would be great. Because honestly, what this makes me concerned about is that a lot of the expertise that we have right now that we've been developing may go by the wayside, and that's good in a way. But that means that our learning curve is extremely steep. We have to build up quickly. That's one thing. And the other thing, as a general question that I was going to bring up, was what are the trends that our panelists are seeing today that they're seeing in other words, how is the labor market really impacted by this? In other words, do we see that a lot of the things that are dealing with robotics in terms of maintaining the machines, operating the machines, translating data, are those things that can be done through a vocational program? Are those things that you really need a university degree to do? These are kind of some of the questions that I have in terms of the general kind of industry and the market, and how we're going to transition from where we are today to this new industry of like really integrating the design and the constructability into one package that's really embedded in a virtual model, what have you.
Time for one quick answer.
I don't know if it's an answer to your question, but I do think there's a real opportunity for best principles as opposed to best practices, right? You all represent an industry, and there are other industries that are using innovation and using technologies that involve high volume, low cost manufacture, robotics. I see Kuka here. I've had a chance to work with Kuka, Kamau, ABB, in a variety of different scenarios. And I just think there's a huge opportunity to learn about materials and other things that could be applicable within this industry from other industries. And you might want to think about bringing in manufacturing engineers or other experts from those other industries to talk about it. I had a chance to visit GE's additive manufacturing research facility. Some of the materials they were working with and some of the products that their engineers were now designing they couldn't conceive of what those designs before because they were impossible to make. And now those impossible designs are being designed and they're being made through additive manufacturing. And I think those are the kind of things where this industry can learn from others that perhaps is not on the table right now.
I think one thing that occurs to me is that today there are, I think, some really compelling examples and statistics of technologies in their infancy as well as technologies that are being applied in really incredible ways. However, I would exercise caution about viewing any of the things that were shown as the end of this process. It really is still the very beginning. One of the things none of us showed was swarm fabrication. The idea that you could use drones to actually layer material in space and not have to use a flat surface, a ground surface to build on. This is a technology that is being developed now, and it also is going to go through its own sort of revolution of how we'll think about constructing from our perspective on remote environments and even remote planets. And I think that one thing that occurs to me is that the longer we take to ask questions about and test and probe and do research relative to these technologies that are new and different and require change, the more disconnected we'll get with the conversation, the more disconnected we'll be from being able to be engaged in directing where we go with these things and where we take them. So I think that's a big part of at least what I would love to see is more companies asking these questions and being willing to step out and say, let's experiment with this and let's test this and let's try this and see if it can be of benefit and see if it can be of use. And then if not, redirect.
All right, we have one more question in the back. He's been waiting very patiently.
Hello, my name is Alejandro. I'm a computer scientist, but I also I'm a structural engineer, and I worked for 2 years in the industry. First of all, thank you. It's been very great presentation. But one of the things that I just want to know is like if there's been any push from you to involve engineers, from mechanical engineer, structural engineer, to actually prove these techniques can actually be more robust, more resilient than your, prefabricated post-tensioned beam. Because one of the first things on the industry, in the structural engineer, is my primary concern is safety. It's like that's my primary concern. I really don't care about the money or about the beauty. It's just I don't want these things go fall and start killing people. Like for example, on the FIU bridge that just collapsed, and sadly, like 6 people just were killed, or the Miami-Dade parking. However, I see a lot of possibilities. But like some research to the implementation on a standard design using robotics, and can that be implemented in the ACI code or the ASCI codes? So, give this sense of security, because when you go out in the field, when you actually go with the government is the same. Is it safe, basically? That's the first thing. So has there been any push from you to actually include engineers and actually prove this actually is much safer and better than other structural designs?
Goes to your question. Actually, I'm working with a lot great structural engineer in the world, including Philip Rock, including John Hossendorf, including Bollinger, and Mike Xie from Australia. We set up a lot workshop and special collaborating project working with them. I think the most important first I want to say, the efficiency of structure system is not try to challenge the safety of structure. I think it's optimization to make it more efficiency better is not to try to challenge the safety problems. So that is 2 different kind of approach. I think safety is the bottom line for all the design. So sometimes, although in the pavilion we want to test to failure, but in the real building system, already everything should be like double check or triple check by different softwares and by different regulations, right? And I think right now, one phenomenon is the integration between the architecture design and the structure engineer design, because the structure engineer they design a lot of plugin in the design flow, including like RhinoVault, Amoeba, Millipad, Abatus, Caramba, this kind of plugin. At the very beginning, this kind of software could be only be implemented by the structural engineer. But right now, if you plug into Rhino, in the very early design phases, architects can implement these tools to engage these tools into their formation in the very early age of design. That means the conceptual design of the architecture, you need to have some structure perspective, which is one of the parameters or one of the perspective you need to think about to generate one great concept. I think that is totally different to the consultant culture the modernism age gave us. The structure consultant should be like just followed by the great architect to post-rationalize whatever the form put forward by the architect. I think that's a totally revolution right now, what's happening by the plugging, this kind of sharing or collaborating culture by the software. Software make it possible to build the intelligence from the structural engineer into the design, early stage design process. I mean, that's a revolution, what's happening right now. So I mean, the quite good challenge for the future, I think is integration. So if the architects understand this kind of structural engineer software, and what's the structural engineer need to be in the future? So that's a challenge, things. Okay?
Okay. I want to thank everyone for coming today. It's fantastic to see everyone staying so late. You know, we said we were going to finish at 2, but, you know, thank you for staying. And I just wanted to let you know that we're not going to let you go forever. We're going to follow up. We're going to actually ask your input. I have your emails, and we'll be in contact with you. Do you want to add anything about the focus group?
We have your names, your numbers. We will be getting back to you. And like you said, no free lunch, no free dessert maybe, or coffee as well. We do want to invite you back to participate in some further focus group with us, some survey work, and help us build this knowledge base that we're building to develop this really important product. I think one more round of applause for our really insightful and dare I say inspiring panelists and our keynote speakers. Your work is really, really at the edge. You're pushing very important boundaries that I think are going to really add to the future. Thanks again. And thank all of you.